Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark LeGrand. I head up the sales efforts at Quigley Transportation. And I want to first of all say thank you for leaning in and joining us today. When we look at routines and habits and all of that, things become second nature once we have a better understanding of how things work and what requirements are. So Brett and myself are excited you're joining us today. If you look at Brett, you look at myself, you probably think, okay, a lot in common, same barber, same amount we spend every year on haircuts, same eyesight, and the list could go on and on. But on a sincere note, one thing we have in common is a passion to help others. And so with the pandemic in 2020 that we're finally just coming out of, it looks like, when we set up our annual marketing plan, we decided, let's give back some way, big or small, whatever it takes in 2021. So each month we're hosting a webinars based on topics that you've asked us to share information on, where you're challenged or where you have issues or difficulties understanding some of the requirements that the DOT puts out there. So hours of service, ELD monitoring, managing your CSA data, and then today's topic, drug and alcohol testing requirements, is really a hot button. We have the most registrations we've had for any of the webinars on this topic, because frankly, there's a lot of confusion circling around, what is needed and required of me as a carrier, as a driver, as an owner operator. So that's what we'll cover today. And then I'll just throw a tease out. Stay with us till the end. Brett will share, I think, a topic that's even bigger for our next month's webinar, and you'll have the details of that at the end. So with that, I'd like to introduce Brett Quigley, President, Founder of Quigley Transportation.
Thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to participate in what is now our 5th monthly webinar, which this month, as Mark mentioned, is presenting on how to eliminate the confusion around drug and alcohol testing. First, I want to do, so you don't have to look at my mug all through the video. I'll stop my here so you can focus on the slides. First, I want to provide a little bit of background on myself and Quigley Transportation Management Solutions. We do this on each of the webinars, just to give you a little bit of history for those that have not attended, on how we got started, what really our mission is. So having over 40 years of experience managing 3 of the nation's largest 100 largest private fleets, I embarked on a mission earlier last year where I handpicked a team of consultants that I've worked with for many years, and that demonstrated an excellent base of knowledge, work ethic, and also a commitment to success. Together, we're leveraging our decades of experience to help smaller companies reduce their transportation costs while also improving their compliance and reducing their risk. So as the slide says here, we're in the pain relief business. By this, what I mean is that we help our clients relieve pain that they have relative to DOT compliance and fleet management. That could be administration of various programs, could be financial pain, from having to employ additional people, pay fines, which we're seeing some of our clients faced with, but even probably more so that a lot of our clients are facing is losing revenue as a result of a compromised safety rating. That they're seeing in excess of 40%, some of the for-hire carriers. So that's pretty alarming when you take a 40% hit on your revenue. So we not only offer consulting services, but we also offer a wide range of other fleet and DOT compliance related services that we will tailor to a carrier's specific needs. All right, so as Mark mentioned, well, I'm not sure if he did or not, but this material will be available after the webinar. So as a result, I won't be covering each slide in finite detail. He'll make it available to everyone in attendance today. And so you can use it as reference material. However, if you have questions on any of the material, please don't hesitate to ask through the Q&A section on our webinar. Or if you think of something after the call, certainly reach out to either Mark or myself, and we'll be glad to follow up and give you the answer for those. So on our webinar today, we're going to talk about the regulations as it relates to drug and alcohol testing, policy and educational material. So who to test, when to test, and what to test for, the training requirements, the substance abuse professional and what role they play when there is a positive test, the FMCSA Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. I know there's a lot of confusion out there. A lot of carriers have struggled to get registered with the clearinghouse. We've helped quite a few of them successfully do that. So I'll talk some about that. We'll also talk about record retention, non-DOT testing, the legalized marijuana, which is becoming obviously more and more a case across many of the states. And then finally, we'll turn it over to Q&A. Okay, on regulations. So there are two main parts of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regulations that apply to this topic. So Part 40, which details the responsibilities of each member and the procedural requirements of the testing process. And then there's Part 382, which we're really going to focus on more today than Part 40. So as a footnote highlights, this presentation is designed simply as an overview, and it's not intended to cover all requirements of these two parts. Certainly, we can offer additional assistance, whether that be through our consulting services, or we can also manage your drug and alcohol testing requirements for you if you'd like. But if you have, if there's confusion or if you have questions after the fact, certainly reach out and we'll be glad to help. Okay, oftentimes we find that carriers either don't have a substance abuse policy or it lacks the required content as we've listed here. In addition to the policy, carriers are also required to provide their drivers educational material on the use of alcohol and controlled substances, which is outlined here on the second bullet point, second section of this slide. So as part of our driver qualification and audit and maintenance program, we provide a catalog of DOT compliant forms that are customized with your company logo and information, which includes a comprehensive policy and also the educational material that DOT requires. So if you have interest in that, certainly we can have further discussion. Okay, now we'll discuss the who, what, and when of alcohol and controlled substance testing. So who to test. So any driver possessing a CDL that is subject to operating a CDL required vehicle is subject to testing requirements. So this is where DOT regs get a little confusing for some folks in that you have the definition of a commercial motor vehicle for most regulations is 10,001 pounds to keep it simple. But for drug and alcohol testing, that follows the CDL requirements, which typically kick in at 26,001 pounds. Now, there's obviously other requirements there, like if you're hauling hazardous material that requires placarding, hauling personnel, and then also combination and also single vehicles. So CDL and non-CDL drivers operating commercial motor vehicles between that category of 10,001 and 26,000 pounds that do not require a CDL cannot be tested. So notice I said the CDL drivers, if they're not operating a CDL required vehicle, they can't be tested under the CDL, under drug and alcohol for DOT. So if you want to provide a similar testing to these drivers, you can do so. You just have to ensure that the DOT forms and tests are non-DOT. I'm sorry, that the non-DOT forms and tests are used and not the DOT forms. Okay, when to test. So there are four main types of DOT alcohol and controlled substance testing. So the first one is pre-employment. Second one is post-accident. Third one is random. And then finally, you have reasonable suspicion. So then you have the example, if a driver tests positive for any of those, then they're required to complete an approved treatment program before they are eligible to return to driving, whether that be for their current employer or for a future employer. So once they complete this program, they are then subject to 2 additional types of testing, which is the return to duty test and then the follow-up testing, which I'll provide more detail on each of these in the following slides. Okay, so pre-employment testing. So before you can have a driver perform a safety-sensitive function, which includes driving, the driver must submit to a pre-employment drug test, and the carrier must receive a verified negative test result. You can't put them on the road unless you have that verified negative test result. So this is one area of confusion that a lot of carriers don't know or that they can do, but a carrier is not required to, but may perform pre-employment alcohol testing. However, to do so, the following 5 conditions must be met. So similar to the drug test, it must be performed prior to the driver performing any safety-sensitive function. You must test all driver applicants. So you can't pick and choose. You have to do all driver applicants, all CDL driver applicants under that program. It can only be done after a contingent offer of employment is issued prior to testing. The testing procedures are the same as that of any others as outlined in Part 40, and then an alcohol concentration of less than 0.04 is required before allowing the driver to perform a safety-sensitive function. So you might ask, why would you go to the expense of testing an applicant for alcohol, knowing that when they walk in the door, they're likely going to be submitted to a pre-employment test? Well, believe it or not, I've seen multiple examples of drivers that failed a pre-employment alcohol test. So I'm not advocating that you go to the expense of putting that program in place. I'm just simply making a statement that I've seen it with my own eyes, and I was absolutely amazed when I saw it. But believe it or not, there are people out there that will show up for a job, for a new job, under the alcohol or under the influence of alcohol. So things just surprise me every day. Okay, post-accident testing. So this chart is a quick reference for you, but essentially the criteria for post-accident testing is anytime there's a fatality involved in an accident involving one of your CDL drivers, or if the driver receives a citation and either a person requires medical treatment away from the scene, or again, the driver receives a citation and a vehicle incurs disabling damage and must be towed away from the scene. So any of those 3 criteria would require a post-accident drug and alcohol test. So just as a quick reference, you might remember 3 words: hearse, nurse, tow. That covers those 3 main criteria, and then you can delve into, okay, if it's nurse and tow, was there a citation issued? So just a quick reference. Excuse me. On post-accident testing, there's also some time frames that must be met. So failure to perform the required alcohol testing within 2 or 8 hours and drug testing within 32 hours following an accident requires the reasons to be well documented. And also, if alcohol testing has not been performed within 8 hours and or drug testing within the 32 hours, the attempts to test must be terminated and the reasons, again, well documented. Okay, random testing. So all applicable drivers must be enrolled in a random testing program. So we recommend using an experienced third-party administrator, also known as a CTPA or TPA, to generate your random selections And that way you can just ensure that it meets all the requirements, because they have a computerized model typically that they'll use to generate the randoms. A lot of times for smaller carriers, you can enroll in a consortium that will add your drivers to a larger pool of drivers, sometimes deferring the frequency that your drivers may be chosen as well. So keep in mind, the FMCSA can change the annual percentage rates for random testing. So currently it's set at 10% for alcohol and 25% for drugs. One thing that we've always done is bump those percentages a percentage point or two, just to ensure that you meet those minimum requirements. That due to any average discrepancies throughout the year on quarter by quarter basis. And then finally, the testing must be distributed equally over that year.
Hey, Brett.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I forgot to mention at the beginning, in addition to the slide decks available to everybody, is that we understand there's going to be questions, and questions are coming in. Just rest assured we're getting those, and we're going to cover all questions at the end. So please be patient. We had a couple questions emailed in advance of the webinar, and we are getting your questions. We do see them, but we'll cover them at the end of the slide deck. So just want to let you know, be safe, be comfortable, and we'll cover what you're looking for. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, reasonable suspicion testing. So this requires that the supervisor has completed the required 2 hours of training. And I'll talk more on this topic later. And that the observation and reasons for testing be well documented. Okay, what to test for. So DOT tests are very specific. They test for marijuana, cocaine, opiates, amphetamines and methamphetamines, and PCP. So DOT does not permit any modifications to these testing components. So testing for any additional drugs must be performed as a separate non-DOT test after the DOT test is completed. The training requirements. So as I mentioned during the reasonable suspicion testing slide, supervisors must complete 60 minutes of training on alcohol misuse and an additional 60 minutes on controlled substance use before they are qualified to identify someone to submit to a reasonable suspicion test. This is one thing that make sure you keep accurate records. Typically, the supervisor will receive a certificate if you go through like an online agency or your TPA for that training. Make sure you retain a copy of that. They only have to do it one time. There's no reoccurring training requirements, but DOT will request those logs or those copies of those certificates during an audit. Okay, the Substance Abuse Professional or SAP Education and Treatment Program. So again, if a driver tests positive for an alcohol or controlled substance test, in order to continue employment as a driver, they must complete an approved education and treatment program that is prescribed by the SAP. So this slide outlines the requirements of the SAP in the process. So I'm not going to read through all these, but note that on the next to the last bullet point, that the SAP will provide the DER, which is a designated employer representative, a copy of the follow-up testing plan. So one of the requirements in the policy itself is that you identify a DER for your company. And if you're using a CTPA or a TPA, they can't function as your DER. So they can perform all the activities relative to your drug and alcohol testing like we could do for you, but we can't function as your DER. Someone within the company themselves has to be designated as a DER to receive information like that and also test results for the company. Okay, return to duty testing. So once the employee completes the SAP prescribed treatment plan, they must submit to and pass a return to duty test. This is the first step in that process. So this step must be a directly observed test, which means that a collector of the same gender must be present and observe the donor provide that specimen. Then, after the employee passes the return to duty test, then the employer is required to administer a series of follow-up tests as prescribed by the SAP. This could range anywhere number from a minimum of 6 to, I've seen the case where I think it was 1 a month. So it all depends on the seriousness of the abuse that the SAP determines when they go through the educational treatment program. So these tests cannot be used as replacements for other tests such as randoms and vice versa. These tests must also be conducted under direct observation. Okay, so the Drug and Alcohol Clearinghouse. So we've found that many of our clients have struggled in setting up their clearinghouse account, as I mentioned earlier, and conducting the required queries. So here are the requirements for the clearinghouse. Certainly we can help anybody with this. We can perform these functions for you. But as far as the queries themselves go, you have to conduct a full query, which the driver has to provide the consent through the clearinghouse itself for pre-employment, or also if you get a positive result back on a limited query, then you have to go and then also do a full query. You do the limited queries, which is based on a consent outside of the clearinghouse via a consent form that specifies a specific time range. You do this on an annual basis for currently employed drivers, or ad hoc or periodic checks on a driver if you have any reason to do that. And then as far as reporting entries into the clearinghouse for both prospective and current employers of a CDL driver, you're required to report into the clearinghouse when a driver has an alcohol confirmation test with a concentration level of 0.04 or higher. When they have a refusal to test, refusals are the same as a positive. If you have actual knowledge, according to 382.107, that a driver has used alcohol on duty within 4 hours of coming on duty prior to post-accident testing, or has used a controlled substance. Then you also, on a positive note, to clear that driver from a past positive, and they've completed their return to duty and then their follow-up testing, you have to go into the clearinghouse and report the negative return to duty test result, as well as once they complete all the follow-up testing requirements as prescribed by the SAP. Okay, as we've all heard the phrase, no job is finished until the paperwork is done. Well, certainly not the same as, the same meaning as the sign that we find in a bathroom on occasion. The importance is quite similar. DOT takes this very, very seriously, and I would encourage you to understand these, make sure that alcohol and controlled substance testing records must be retained up to 5 years. It varies by types of records, which I've detailed here in the slide. And the security of these records is paramount. So make sure they're secured under lock and key, that no one, the access is limited to only those with a need to know basis has access to them. Okay, so non-DOT testing. These can be used to test CDL drivers in the event that they're involved, for example, an accident that does not meet the definition of a DOT accident for the purpose of alcohol and controlled substance testing. So example, if you have a driver that is involved in a fender bender, so it's not a fatality, they weren't cited. A vehicle could have been towed away from the scene, or an injury could have been treated away from the scene, but your driver wasn't cited. But you still want to conduct a drug and alcohol test. You can do so under your company policy. It just can't be as a DOT test. It has to be a non-DOT test. You can also The advantage of using non-DOT testing is that you can test for additional drugs, such as synthetic drugs. And then hair follicle testing, which last company I worked for, we did hair follicle testing. That's an example of a non-DOT test as well. Excuse me. As far as legalized marijuana, we see, states ratifying the use of legalized marijuana, whether it be for medicinal purposes or fully legalized or whatever the case may be. Currently, the FMCSA does not recognize marijuana as a legalized drug, whether it be for medicinal or recreational use, regardless of what the state laws say. The other thing that I would also caution here, based on firsthand experience, is the use of CBD can be a problem. So it's not, CBD is not regulated by the FDA, and as such has the potential of generating a positive test for marijuana depending on the amount of use and also the THC content. We had an individual that was using CBD oil for the treatment of anxiety, and he actually tested positive for marijuana on one of the drug tests that we administered. So just wanted to bring that up to everyone. All right, with that, I will open it up to Q&A. So again, we'll provide answers to questions you may have. Certainly, if we don't know the answers, we'll research it and follow up with you later with the correct answer. So with that, Mark, I'll turn it over to you for Q&A.
Sure. Brett, the first one I have, and then I know a couple came to you, and then a couple also came in via the chat feature on our Zoom call today. So first one we got prior to the webinar was, can you clarify for me RTD or return to duty? Is it the same when I have to do a test as after they return from a leave of absence, such as military, medical, or something other?
Okay, I'm sorry, Mark, can you repeat that?
Sure. So the question is, do I need to do a return to duty test for someone that is returning to work after a leave of absence for medical, military, or some other reason?
No, as long as they remained in the pool while they were out, then no, you would not have to retest.
Okay, great. Hopefully that answered your question if you're on the line with us. And then Brett, you got a couple directly to you.
I do. The first one is, what would you suggest to do in case if the driver was involved in a DOT recordable accident and did not receive immediately the ticket? Later on, driver got the ticket by mail on his CDL address for that accident. Excellent question. And in this case, you have to follow the cutoff for the times. So in this case, I'm assuming the driver didn't receive that citation until after 8 hours or even the 32 hours for drugs. So in that case, he would not be subject, he or she would not be subject to drug and alcohol testing, because that time period after the accident itself has expired. Okay, the controlled substance currently is at 50%. According to the online regulation, it shows 25%. I think they reduced that here a year or two ago from 50% to 25%. And that came in from two different people. So yeah, you can check the online regulations. It references 10% and 25%. Okay, that's so far the questions that we've got submitted in.
Here's a couple more, Brett. They came through a little different avenue. What do we do in the case the accident is late at night, nobody's open to do a test, or a driver cannot reach a facility in the time frame required?
In those cases, you would document the reasons why you were not able to test within the 2 hours, the 8 hours, and the 32 hours for drug.
Okay. And the next one, are drivers that are selected as backup required to be tested, even if all required for random were tested?
No. Now the backups are only there in case there's a valid reason why your primary selections can't be tested. And I
Okay.
do have another one that just came in, Mark, online. Says, how do I find someone to certify DER? Actually, there's no one that has to certify. Your DERs don't have to be certified. They just have to be identified in your policy so that the employees know who the DER is. And your TPA, your MRO, they know who to send the test results to. And that's pretty much all you need as far as the DER. I say that they should be somewhat well versed in the regulations, but there is no certification to be a DER.
I got another one here, Brett, for you. We're a small company, can only one person who is a safety manager and is the one responsible to schedule all the tests be reasonable, suspicious, certified, or do dispatchers, who are the ones that are mostly in contact with the drivers, also need to be certified?
So I would recommend the dispatchers are also certified, because you really want the people that are interacting with the drivers on a regular basis that would have the opportunity to observe the potential for abuse or intoxication.
Okay. And then along the same lines, can a non-certified person send a driver to do or request a reasonable test?
No. Now you have to have, well, I guess when it says send the person, you have to have someone that is trained, that's been trained, that identifies that individual needs to be reasonable suspicion tested, as far as, whether it be taking that individual in. I mean, somebody else can take them in, or, if another supervisor, if that supervisor that has had the reasonable suspicion testing or training tells another supervisor to communicate that. I don't know if there's any regulation that prohibits that, but whoever makes that determination must have the training.
Okay. Here's one. This organization went out and purchased from a local pharmacy an alcohol testing machine and put it in their office. Can that machine be used for an alcohol test each time the driver returns to duty from their home time, just as a precaution that there's no alcohol on their breath? And if so, should it be recorded?
So the answer would be no. So you have to have, again, remember the 4 reasons you can test. So it's pre-employment, post-accident, random, or reasonable suspicion. So if you don't have reasonable suspicion to believe that an individual has been drinking prior to coming on duty, then you really have no valid reason to administer a DOT alcohol test.
Okay, and then here's a follow-up to that. just with total transparency, this individual shared that they do that today. They test everybody on that machine. They would like to continue to do that each time the driver goes home. They don't report the information to the DOT. Should we record that in their file each time we do it, or not record it at all? And so I guess I'll just throw in here, Brett, as you're thinking of the response there based on your previous answer, perhaps, and I can't speak for this individual, if you'd like to send in more clarification, you're welcome, but perhaps they have a reasonable doubt, if you want to call it that, and why they're testing everybody. So suspicion, whatever. So if that's the case and they're doing that, Brett, the question is, they're not reporting it to the DOT. Should they put it in the DQ files, driver file each time, or not record it at all?
So my answer would be this, is that I would go back to your substance abuse policy, and this falls into the non-DOT testing. So you have the right to administer non-DOT testing however you prefer. What I would strongly suggest is that you include language in there that you, as a company, you reserve the right to do non-DOT drug or alcohol testing prior to performing any safety sensitive work. It would be considered a non-DOT alcohol test, even though it's the same as a DOT test. Those would not be administered to, or that would not be reported to DOT. You couldn't disclose those on a pre-employment verification if you terminated someone, because they're considered non-DOT tests. The other thing that we've done in the past is built into our policies. We reserve the right to do wall-to-wall testing, and what that was is based on non-DOT tests. But if we had reasonable suspicion, or we had reason to believe that there was suspicious activity going on within a facility, we would essentially, when everybody reported to duty, we would lock the facility down. We would have a mobile collections company come in, and we would test everyone, including supervisors. Everybody that was at that facility would submit to a non-DOT wall-to-wall test, and it would be, in our case, we had multiple facilities. Only those would be tested on a corporate testing form, and the test results would come straight to corporate. So that would be another option to consider in that case.
Okay.
I do have another one here, came in from the field. It says, how do you get certified to send someone to get a drug test? I'm assuming you're talking about the reasonable suspicion training. That, again, a lot of times your TPAs will provide that service as an online training. We can provide it through our agency that we use for drug testing. There's many, you might just Google reasonable suspicion supervisor training, and a lot of times you'll find a lot of resources there. But again, we can help you with that if you have interest.
Right, I got several more that have come in. This is similar to what we were just talking about a couple minutes ago. If we make it an internal policy to test all drivers in any type of accident, should it be done as a non-DOT test?
Absolutely. But keep in mind that if it qualifies as a DOT recordable accident that requires a DOT test, you have to perform the DOT test first. And if you want to then perform another separate non-DOT test, it has to be after the DOT test is completed, and it has to be with an entirely different specimen.
Okay. What do we do? Next question. What do we do if the driver received the ticket at the scene of the accident and reported that no tow was made. But later we found out in the crash report, the other vehicle was actually towed.
Well, again, you can only operate off the information that's provided to you at the time of incident. I mean, that would be one that obviously if you didn't know to administer the test, you would just have to document the reasons why. I would question why the driver didn't share that information at the time of the occurrence.
Okay. Next one, what is, and I apologize, it look failing? What is facilitating? I'm not sure the word here, but maybe you can fill in here. What is, and then it looks like failing to do random drug and alcohol tests at the applicable annual rate. I guess the question is, what does an annual rate mean in this regulation 382.305.b.1 for alcohol, and then the one for drugs? So I'll answer it this way, Brett. If you'd rather, in the interest of time, we email that person back directly, we can, or if you want to address it here, we've got a handful of other questions too.
Yeah, let me get back with that individual on that so I can do a little bit of research on the regulation they referenced.
Okay. And then same individual asked, we had a drug and alcohol company policy that was at zero tolerance for drivers who use drugs while employed with them. And we would not hire any drivers who had drug and alcohol violations. Now we changed to hire drivers who had THC violations and have completed SAP. Should their old drivers sign a new policy?
I mean, if you've updated the policy, it's always a good practice to reissue those policies to your current workforce. Now, DOT doesn't require that you do, but I out of best practice, I would recommend that you do.
Okay. So next one, and the question earlier was failing drug and alcohol. So thanks for the clarification on that. Next one is a follow-up on an alcohol test for a driver on return to duty in the office, decided to do so on major holidays, and drivers actually want that process simply to make sure there's zero test result when they had a few drinks over the weekend at their house. So I guess first of all, does that make sense? With the alcohol testing at an office, bought the machine from the local pharmacy, and why they are doing it is because after a holiday, there's no other way to test typically. Could have had a couple adult beverages over the weekend. Does that change anything?
No, it's still, you still have to follow the criteria for DOT testing. If it doesn't meet the definition of reasonable suspicion, which you'd have a hard time proving, I think, that every individual coming, through the door before going to work after following a holiday would meet the definition of reasonable suspicion.
Okay.
You couldn't DOT test.
All right.
You can non-DOT test, as I said earlier, but no, you couldn't DOT test.
All right. And along those same lines, does a person need reasonable suspicion testing training to send drivers to pre-employment and random drug tests only?
No.
Okay.
Nope. Just because reasonable suspicion training is simply designed so that an individual supervisor of those drivers has the ability to identify potential issues that a current driver has or demonstrates that may indicate the use of alcohol or controlled substances.
Okay. And then the last one I have, Brett, and I don't know if you got any more on your side, is a further clarification about this in-office alcohol testing machine. And the last question was really about in-house alcohol tests. So I'm going to answer that one for you and basically make an ask. And that would be to that individual. On one of the following slides, you're going to see Brett and my contact information. If you'd like to talk offline and do a deeper dive about this, so you get the comfort level you're looking for as far as what needs or shouldn't be done, feel free to reach out to us. And again, our contact information is coming up a little bit in a minute or two.
Yeah, I would also offer that, and I do have another question I'll address here in a minute, but I would also offer that part 40, which I really didn't delve into a lot in this presentation, there's a lot of information in there about BATs, which are breath alcohol technicians. And if the individual that has that machine is not well versed in that section, I would highly recommend that that you review that, because if and when you do want to conduct a DOT drug and alcohol test, you need to make sure you follow the correct protocol throughout that testing process. Personally, every company I've worked for, we've not done our own drug and alcohol testing for a specific reason. I wanted that insulation. I wanted an independent third party doing the testing to relieve us of that responsibility. And when there was an issue, I didn't want there to be any question that we didn't follow the right protocol in the testing process. So, okay, the other question I received is, what is a reportable accident for a DOT drug and alcohol test versus non-DOT drug and alcohol? So again, this comes back to the definition, the quick reference of the hearse nurse tow. So if there's a fatality, if your driver's involved in an accident and there's a fatality of anyone involved, if your driver is involved in an accident and they receive a citation and someone in the accident is treated for receives medical treatment away from the scene, or your driver receives a citation and a vehicle is towed away from the scene. Those are the reasons why you do post-accident testing, and the only reasons why you do DOT post-accident testing. Again, you can do non-DOT testing if your policy addresses that, but it has to be strictly on a non-DOT test, not DOT.
Gotcha.
Okay, well, listen, I appreciate all that.
Can I just add real quick, Brett? For all of the questions that we got, if you want to discuss them further, if there's more information that you'd like to share directly, feel free, reach out to Brett or myself. Here's our contact information, and we can have a one-on-one conversation about your specific situation, the why behind it, and what is required according to the drug and alcohol testing requirements. So, sorry, Brett, go ahead.
No, thank you. So as Mark mentioned, here's our contact information. So certainly feel free to reach out to either one of us. And with that, I just want to, again, thank you for your time and participation in today's webinar. Next month, our webinar is going to be on June 23rd. And as Mark mentioned, this is one probably bigger than drug and alcohol. So we're going to have a guest speaker. It's Brett McGinnis, which is the Vice President of McGriff Insurance Services, presenting on how to control your insurance costs. I know that is, given the skyrocketing insurance premiums within the transportation industry. We just felt that this would be an excellent opportunity for an industry expert like Brett to share with our audience methods that carriers can take to control their insurance costs. Not to mention he's got a great first name. But until then, please be safe and let us know if we can be of any assistance with your transportation needs. And again, thank you. Take care.